it's an honor and privilege to introduce Professor Ishii from Tokyo, talking about the relationship between the onset of Meniere's disease and sympathetic hyperactivity. He is the clinical director of otolaryngology at the Tokyo Shinjuku Medical Center in Tokyo, Japan. And he has many other accolades, but we'll let him go ahead and get started. And we appreciate him staying up late tonight to talk to us early in the morning in California. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for introducing me. And I have to introduce myself. I study on vestibular research in the United States for about over 30 years ago, Houston, Texas. I studied on vestibular anatomy and physiology and autonomic nervous function in the Meniere College of Houston. So I have to say to you, howdy, everybody. Anyway, let's start now. Time is limited, so start now.
Tokyo got a snow today. This is my snow garden at home. As you may know, February is the coldest month in Tokyo. Now, let's start my presentation. Good morning, everyone. I'm honored to be invited to address you all at today's Grand Round. I visited the Vascular Institute for short training course on temporal bone anatomy and inner ear surgery about 30 years ago, so I'm very grateful for this opportunity. Today, I will talk about Meniere disease, an important disease in neurosurgery and its relationship with sympathetic hyperactivity and Shimoyake. Shimoyake is a Japanese word meaning turbulence or peroneo in English. Our paper was published in Frontiers in Neurology in March 2022. If you enter the keywords Meniere and Shimoyake into the internet search, you will see this paper at the top of the list. Anyone can read it for free. Today's presentation, I'd like to tell you how Meniere disease and Shimoyake share a similar etiology. I hope you will enjoy it. I'm well acquainted with certain detective here in Los Angeles. His name is Lieutenant Colombo. I hear that Colombo was a very popular series on NBC TV in the United States, and indeed it was one of my favorite shows as well. Everyone knows who the criminal is. The criminal is shrouded in many mysteries, and Lieutenant collects evidence, solves mysteries, and hunts down the criminal. This keeps the viewers on the edge of their seats. The criminal in today's presentation is Meniere disease. Now, let's start solving the mysteries of Meniere disease. Although it has been almost 160 years since Meniere disease was first described, it's still a disease full of mystery. For example, why does stress trigger the onset of Meniere disease? Why does Meniere disease first manifest with low-tone sensorineural hearing loss? Why do both hearing loss and vertigo occur? Why does the direction of nystagmus change during the acute phase? You are probably familiar with the expression butterfly effect. This expression came from chaos theory. The fluttering of butterflies' wings in Brazil might set off a tornado in Texas. When a tiny variation dramatically changes the result of a system, this sensitivity is what we call the butterfly effect. I'm going to explain how tiny stress-induced changes can lead to Meniere disease. Here you can see the direction of nystagmus immediately after and 1 hour after a right-sided Meniere disease attack in 34-year-old woman. Immediately after the attack, nystagmus is right beating, namely irritative nystagmus. However, 1 hour after the attack, the direction of nystagmus is reversed from right to left beating, namely paralytic nystagmus. Here is an MRI with 4 hours after administration of gadolinium contrast in the same woman 6 hours her attack. Endolymphatic hydrops can be seen on both sides, but it is more dominant on the affected side. Today's keywords are 2 types of stress and 2 types of channel. The 2 types of stress are overstress and shear stress, and the 2 types of channels are trip channel and potassium ion channel. These 2 different kinds of stress and 2 different kinds of channel are keys to solving some of the mysteries of Meniere disease, including vertigo attacks. Here is an overview of our study. The theory we put forward in our paper to explain some of the mysteries of Meniere disease is based on our findings from prospective study conducted between 1999 and 2021. Subjects were 129 patients on a stable phase of Meniere disease, 97 women and 32 men, and 31 healthy adult volunteers, 22 women and 9 men. Patients were defined to be on stable phase if they had had no vertigo attack and no medication for Meniere disease for more than 3 months. Autonomic nervous system function test had the same measurement conditions for healthy adult volunteers and patients. The test is conducted in a quiet sitting position with eyes closed on Saturdays and Sundays when our clinic was normally closed. Autonomic nervous system function was measured with this new type of small autonomic nervous function test device. The data measured are transmitted via Bluetooth to a computer. Power spectrum analysis of ECG heart rate and heart rate variability was used to measure sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous function. In the 12 years of this study, we were able to measure sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous function immediately before an attack in only 9 patients, which accounted for just 1.5% of all attacks. This slide shows the result of power spectrum analysis in those 9 patients. The results show that immediately before an attack, there is an increase in heart rate HR, which represents sympathetic activity, and in low-frequency spectral power HF, and the ratio of low frequency to high frequency spectral power LF per HF, which represent composite of sympathetic and parasympathetic activities. On the other hand, there is a decrease in high frequency spectral power HF, which represents parasympathetic activity. What you see here is an electronic pupillometer, which we also use to measure autonomic nervous function. This device measures pupillary reaction to light, which is affected by autonomic nervous function and enables us to measure left and right pupils separately. Therefore, left and right autonomic nervous function can be measured independently. In addition, each measurement takes only less than a minute. This video shows the pupillary reaction to light. You can see the constriction and the subsequent dilation of pupil in response to light. The pupil constriction following instantaneous light exposure represent parasympathetic function, and the subsequent pupil dilation represent sympathetic function. Here is an example of the result of electronic pupillometry. The data from the electronic pupillometer are sent to an iPad via Wi-Fi. The yellow band represents light exposure. The green double arrow represents the pupil constriction phase due to the action of the parasympathetic nervous system, and red double arrow represents pupil dilation phase due to the action of the sympathetic nervous system. Here, the V and T5 represent sympathetic activity, and VC represent parasympathetic activity. This slide shows the result of electronic pupillometry in the 9 patients with Meniere disease in a stable phase, just before an attack, just after an attack, just after treatment, and 3 days after treatment. Treatment comprised an infusion of 100 mg of sodium bicarbonate plus 5 mg of diazepam, administered for its antiemetic effect once just after an attack. Here larger values of VC, maximum constriction velocity, indicate more activated sympathetic nervous system. Upward pointing arrow means increasing parasympathetic activity. Larger values of VD, maximum dilation velocity, indicate more activated sympathetic nervous system, and upward pointing arrow means increasing sympathetic activity. Smaller values of T5 indicate more activated sympathetic nervous system. Downward pointing arrow means increasing sympathetic activity. Just before an attack, a significant reduction in parasympathetic activity and excitation of sympathetic activity was found on the affected side. Just after an attack, parasympathetic activity on the affected side was activated, followed by recovery of parasympathetic activity and suppression of sympathetic activity after treatment. For more detailed data on these 9 patients, please refer to our paper. Patients with Meniere disease usually have a number of symptoms in addition to vertigo and hearing loss. We evaluated the incidence of such co-occurring symptoms in 211 patients with Meniere disease who had had 3 or more vertigo attacks. The most frequent symptoms, including multiple occurrences, and neck and shoulder stiffness, 96%, followed by cold extremities, 87%, Shimoyake chilblains, 83%, and diarrhea, predominant irritable bowel syndrome, DIBS, 78%. Many of these symptoms are thought to be associated with stress and are also accompanied by excitation of sympathetic nervous system. The first study showing the relationship between the autonomic nervous system and the central nervous system was published in 1997. Since then, there has been a number of studies demonstrating such a relationship. Given that autonomic activity is affected by stress, the interaction between the central and autonomic nervous system is important, and recently, this interaction has been proposed to be the so-called Central Autonomic Network, CAN. White coat hypertension in which your blood pressure increases when you see medical staff in white coat at the clinic, even though your blood pressure is normal at home, it's thought to be one such effect of the activity of the can. The can react strongly to stress such as dissatisfaction, anxiety, unpleasantness, and anger. It also affects autonomic nervous function, hormone regulation, body temperature regulation, sleep rhythm, and immune function. Response of the can to stress always activate the sympathetic nervous system. Prefrontal cortex activity suppresses the can's response. This slide shows the interaction of the can with immune function. Overstress activates the can, which increases the number of monocytes along with induction of macrophages. Macrophages induce IL-1 beta, TNF-alpha, and INOS. Monocytes induce IL-6, which further increases the number of macrophages. Activation of the can also causes sympathetic hyperactivity. In short, overstress activates the can, which impacts both sympathetic hyperactivity and inflammatory immune function. I mentioned that irritable bowel syndrome (IBS) is commonly seen in patients with Meniere disease. This slide shows the pathophysiological pathway of IBS caused by overstress. IBS and inflammatory bowel disease are known to be associated with stress, namely through the brain-gut interaction. Overstress induces monocytes to increase the number of macrophages in the intestine. With increasing tissue pro-inflammatory cytokines such as IL-1 and TNF-alpha, expression of TRPV4 in the gastrointestinal epithelial cells and the vascular endothelial cells increases, which prolongs inflammation and increases vascular permeability. Overactivation of the sympathetic nerves also increases adrenaline release, which activates TRPV4 in the vascular endothelial cells to increase potassium ions, resulting in increased vascular permeability. This may cause a vicious cycle of intestinal inflammation. Genes related to IL-1, TNF-alpha, and alpha-1 adrenergic receptors has been reported. In the large intestine of mice, TRPV4 is normally observed in the epithelial cells. However, when an inflammation-inducing substance is administered into the large intestine, expression of TRPV4 increases in the vascular endothelial cells of mucous membrane and submucosa. Furthermore, macrophages are recruited, and TRPV4 in the recruited macrophages induces secretion of cytokines such as TNF-alpha and IL-1. The activated TRPV4 activates JNK, Jun N-terminal kinase signaling, which reduces the vascular endothelial adhesion factor cadherin. As a result, vascular permeability increases to cause edema, resulting exacerbation of intestinal inflammation. It is reported that intestinal vascular permeability is increased in patients with Meniere disease. The same occurs in blood vessels of extremities, resulting in Shimoyake. What you see here are manifestations of Shimoyake. Shimoyake causes the tips of fingers and toes to become red, swollen, and itchy. A reddish swelling of the auricles in people playing winter sports is manifestation of Shimoyake. Even in mild Los Angeles, people can be afflicted with Shimoyake. Blood vessels that can cause Shimoyake are classified into two types, type A and type B. In type A vessels, an arteriole simply branches into capillaries and then the capillaries coalesce into a venule. Cold stimulation causes arterioles to constrict, which creates shear stress on the endothelial cells of arteriole. This shear stress activates TRPV4 in the endothelial cells, causing calcium ion to flow into TRPV4 and potassium ions to flow out. This increases capillary permeability. Overactivation of the sympathetic nervous system by cold stimulation induces recruitment of macrophages, which activate pro-inflammatory cytokines. Progression of inflammation further activates TRPV4, resulting in capillary hyperpermeability. This creates a vicious cycle of non-infectious inflammation. In type B vessels, arteriovenous anastomosis, AVAS, connect an arteriole and a venule. This can divide the shear stress into two parts to distribute the pressure, which can stabilize capillary pressure. However, shear stress on the AVAS type B vessels is higher than that on the arterioles in type A vessels, which make it more likely to increase vascular permeability. Therefore, the tips of fingers and the toes and the auricles in which type B vessels are dominant are susceptible to Shimoyake. The capillaries of osseous spiral lamina and the spiral limbus are of type A and are distributed like a coil. Many capillaries are distributed around anterior vestibular artery and the superior vestibular nerve. The image on the left are graciously provided by Professor Nomura at the University of Tokyo, Department of Otolaryngology. This slide shows the capillaries of stria vascularis and spiral ligament. The red line represents type B vessels and the rest represent type A vessels. This slide shows the capillaries of stria vascularis observed by scanning microscopy. An arteriole branches into capillaries in a fan-like structure. Vestibular organs other than the cochlea also have a large number of capillaries distributed in a mesh-like pattern. The image on the left is a utricle of a cat, the center is a utricle of a human, and the right is a posterior semicircular canal ampulla of a cat. These images are graciously provided by Professor Nomura at the University of Tokyo. This slide shows blood vessel of cochlea of a cat. Ink was injected into the blood vessel to show the distribution of the vessels. One very interesting feature of this image is that the density of the capillaries distributed in stria vascularis is highest in the basal turn, followed by the middle turn and the apical turn. In our paper, we referred to the book by Professor Nomura and stated that capillaries are distributed more in the apical turn than in the basal turn in the cochlea. However, Professor Nomura said that the findings reported in his book were highly likely to be attributed to age-related changes. This slide clearly shows that there are more capillaries in the stria vascularis of the basal turn than in the other turns. This suggests that if there are increase in the transfer of potassium ions from the capillaries reach stria vascularis to the end lymph, then the basal turn would be the most susceptible. The circulus below the basal turn is also likely to be affected. So, what I'm trying to say is that the inner ear is mass of capillaries. The low-tone hearing loss, the first symptom of Meniere disease, is thought to be attributed to wide basilar membrane, as described in the article by Professor Ishii. As you can see the pink double arrow in this slide, the wider basilar membrane is more susceptible to increased internal pressure, which impairs vibration of basilar membrane. Higher internal pressure induced by endolymphatic hydrops more greatly affect the apical turn than basal turn, and low-tone hearing loss can occur. Now, I'm going to give you a clue that will make the butterfly flutter its wings. Activated alpha-1 adrenergic receptors constrict arterioles, and beta-1 adrenergic receptors increase potassium ion secretion. So, what will happen? TRPV4 and beta-1 adrenergic receptors are present in many sites in the inner ear. The organ of Corti, dark cells, ampulla, the endolymphatic sac, all have both TRPV4 and beta-1 adrenergic receptors. This slide shows the distribution of adrenergic receptors and TRPV4 in the cochlea. Alpha-1 adrenergic receptors constrict blood vessels, and beta-1 adrenergic receptors TRPV4 increase the amount of potassium ions in the cochlea. Aminoglycosides are known to cause renal dysfunction. This is because aminoglycosides cause damage to the capillary endothelial cells of the distal renal tubules, and as a result, vascular permeability increases. This stimulates TRPV4 present in the epithelial cells to cause calcium ion to flow into blood, TRPV4, and conversely, to cause potassium ion to flow out of TRPV4. As a result, large amount of potassium ion flow out into the distal tubules. Nephrotoxic aminoglycosides also cause inner ear toxicity. According to study by Karasawa, increased permeability of the vascular endothelial cell causes potassium ions to flow out of TRPV4 in the stria vascularis in the cochlea and into the end lymph, which results in cell damage within the cochlea. Vascular hyperpermeability is also caused by the activation of TRPV4. In other words, overactivation of sympathetic nervous system constricts arterioles, which create shear stress on the vascular endothelial cells. This activates TRPV4 to release potassium ions, which relaxes vascular smooth muscles, resulting in capillary hyperpermeability. Overactivation of the sympathetic nervous system activates alpha-1 adrenergic receptors and beta-1 adrenergic receptors. Increased capillary pulse pressure causes shear stress, which activates TRPV4 to release potassium ions from TRPV4. As a result, the amount of both potassium ions and water increases in the end lymph, resulting in endolymphatic hydrops. This slide shows experiment in which potassium ions are injected into either the middle ear or inner ear. Nystagmus occurred in all experiments. Irritative nystagmus first occurs, followed by paralytic nystagmus. In other words, An increase in potassium ion in both endolymph and perilymph causes biphasic nystagmus. Owing to their strong electrical charge, if the amount of potassium ions increases in the perilymph, they repel each other and move through the potassium ion channels into the endolymph, which causes endolymph hydrops compared to normal endolymph. Now, let me bring all of these pieces together and summarize my talk. Hyperactivity of the sympathetic nerve on the affective side stimulate alpha-adrenergic receptors in the arteries under the same control as the sympathetic nerves in the inner ear on the affective side to increase the intravascular pressure. This creates shear stress which stimulates TRPV4. Hyperactivity of the sympathetic nerves also activate beta-1 adrenergic receptors, increasing potassium ions and in addition resulting in rapid increase in efflux of potassium ions from TRPV4. Increasing of influx of potassium ions into endolymph in the inner ear causes irritative nystagmus. Subsequently, paralytic nystagmus occurs due to neurotoxicity and hearing loss occurs. Increased venous pressure around inner ear further increases the endolymphatic pressure, which exacerbates endolymphatic hydrops. TRPV4 activation also increases pro-inflammatory cytokines, which further increases vascular permeability, creating vicious cycle resulting in endolymphatic hydrops. The pathophysiology of Meniere disease is remarkably similar to that of Shimoyake, so that's why we named it Shimoyake theory of Meniere disease. Warm up your body for Shimoyake, warm up your heart for Meniere disease. This concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.